This is the Cherry Pick channel. Python tutorial videos. Functions are needed to avoid repeating the same code. If we have written a calculation algorithm once and we need it in different parts of the program, then we do not use copy-paste, but enclose the code we need in a function and call this function in the right place. This allows you to write clean code and reuse it, sharing responsibility between programmers. When one writes one function, the other can write another function at the same time, and then they can combine them in some part of the program or its logic. This is how we accumulate code. If there were no functions, then we would write the same code several times, wasting time. The possibility of making a mistake would also be more likely. If there is a checked function, we know that all calculations are made correctly, we only need to call this function and use the result. In Python, a function is defined using the def statement. In the first line, we write def and the name of our function. The name of the function is usually written in small letters and separated by an underscore. The name should reflect what your function does. Let's write our first function, which does nothing, but just prints hello. To call this function, we need to put parentheses at the end. If we do not put parentheses, we will get this information: there is no error, but the function did not work. Note that at the end the function writes us none. This is because we have not shown what we want to return as the result of our function. I can do as many calculations as I want inside, but I must specify what result my function should return. Let's say inside I will add and multiply data and assign results to different variables. But with the help of the return statement, I show which result of all my calculations to return after execution. The print statement inside the function body will be executed and print the result. This often confuses beginners and they often use a print instead of return, where they put the result of their function. Using print inside a function, without return, is possible if you do not use the result of this function in further calculations. If you didn't specify what your function returns, it will return none by default. Using and executing inside the print function is a side effect, and you need to understand where you see the result of the print function, and where the result of your own function is. Imagine that you wrote a function that does calculations and used print instead of return. If you called such a function, you got the printed result. And then I want to use the result of this function in other calculations and see what we get. It tells us that our function has the type none, and this is the topic of the last lesson. We can't add a number to the poke type. Therefore, always write what your function returns, since by default its result is none, nothing. And we can already print as the function itself, or pass the result of its work to a variable and then print this variable. Accordingly, we can already work with this result in our further calculations. The functions I have shown do not take any arguments, but this is not typical for functions. Usually they take some data from the user and do calculations with it, and then return the result. The task of the function is to take any values, and return the result of its work. Let's say our function will find the volume of the cylinder. Then it would be more reasonable to call it the volume of the cylinder. I'll write it down like this. Next, in parentheses after the name, we need to specify what variables we expect from the user. To find the volume of the cylinder, we need to multiply the area of the circle by the height. For the area of the circle, we need a radius. Calculations can be large, but try not to overload your functions. One function should perform one small task. This will make it easier for you to use them in your code as building blocks for building a program. And here the readability of your function names will be very important. Let them be a little long, but another programmer, or even you in a year, should be clear without analyzing the code, what your function does. Further inside the function, I can already operate on this data to build calculations. We can write the code directly. For example, pi is we have 3 whole 1400ths multiplied by the radius squared and multiplied by the height. I put parentheses for the readability of the code. In fact, exponentiation takes precedence over multiplication and will be performed first and without parentheses. And I can use libraries, for example the math library. I told you about it in the 5th lesson and I want to remind you how to call it and use it. For exponentiation, I can use the built-in Python function par. We are now using the result of another function in our function. We write its name and pass arguments in parentheses. And here PyCharm tells us what arguments it needs. The first is to specify what we want to raise to a power, this is our radius, and the second is to what degree we need to raise the number. I want my function to return the volume as the result of calculations. Let's call our function and print its result. We can get the result as an integer. We can round the number to 3 decimal places. Note that we again use another function inside our own, where we pass the result of our calculations and specify to what sign we want to get rounding. What is there under the hood of this function, we may not know. It was written by other programmers, and we use their work in our projects. If we don't pass arguments, we get an error and you see a hint that this function needs 2 arguments to work. Or if I pass only one variable to my function, I see a hint that there is not enough height. Imagine if I called my variables a and b, it would be unclear what should be passed as the first argument and what as the second. Inside, as you can see, the radius is raised to a power and the height is multiplied. Incorrect data entry will give us the wrong result. Our task is to learn how to write functions that we or everyone else will use. As you know, many tasks have already been written by someone and posted in libraries. While you are learning, it will be better to suffer a little yourself, but in real projects you will often import third-party libraries and use functions from there. Depending on the tasks, some libraries are used for graphics, others for calculations, others for testing, and so on. It all depends on the needs of your tasks. You will quickly have your favorite libraries and you will use them as well as write and upload your own. Python adds the most popular and popular libraries to its updates. If you look at one of them, we see a description of what this library does and below are the functions, def name, parameters and what it returns. Note that some values are already specified. These are required and optional attributes of functions, which we will look at in the next lesson.